When I saw him on that stage, I knew instantly. I wasn't looking at a former student anymore. I was looking at a man I should have walked away from the moment he said my name. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would cross that line. Not because I'm better than anyone else, or because I haven't thought about things I shouldn't, but because I built my entire adult life around structure, restraint, rules. I was a teacher, a wife, a mother. I knew where the lines were, and I didn't cross them. Until I did. My name is Rachel, I'm 43 years old, and I've been teaching English literature at a private high school in Seattle for almost 2 decades. I'm married to Tom, we've been together 18 years, and we have a teenage son, Luke, who's starting to hate everything I say, which probably means I'm doing something right. Or at least, something normal. To anyone looking in from the outside, my life probably looks tidy, predictable, safe. I drive a mid-sized SUV, I drink herbal tea at night. I watch true crime documentaries while folding laundry. I wear soft sweaters and flat shoes and make sure our family calendar is color-coded and up-to-date. But what no one sees is how numb I've become. How easily I move through my days without really feeling anything. Tom and I haven't kissed like we meant it in almost 2 years. We share space and bills and responsibilities. But not intimacy. Not connection. We're polite. We're functional. We are essentially co-managers of a life we built so long ago. We've forgotten why. And then came Nick. He was one of my students 11 years ago. Quiet, brilliant, a little aloof. He had this stillness to him, like he was always listening, always absorbing. Other teachers called him difficult. I called him interesting. He wrote with such intensity, such rawness, even as a teenager. I used to keep one of his essays in my desk drawer, not because it was inappropriate, but because I never thought about him beyond that. He graduated, moved to New York, pursued acting. I vaguely heard he was in a few things, TV shows, off-Broadway plays. I didn't follow his career. I didn't even remember his last name until I saw it printed on a poster downtown. Nick Riley returns to Seattle with his original one-man show. I stood frozen on the sidewalk for what felt like 10 minutes. His face stared back at me, older, sharper, magnetic. It wasn't nostalgia I felt, it was something else. A pull, a shift in gravity. I walked into the theater lobby, bought a ticket for the Friday night performance, and told Tom I was going to a book club meeting. That night, I sat in the 3rd row, alone. The lights dimmed, and there he was, on stage, under a single spotlight. He was taller than I remembered, broader. He moved with a kind of slow intensity that made it impossible to look away. The performance was intimate, raw. He spoke about identity, memory, shame. And in one monologue, he described a teacher who once told him that the words he wrote mattered, that he mattered. I stopped breathing. After the show, I didn't plan to stay, but I lingered in the lobby, pretending to check my phone. And then I heard it. Rachel? I turned. And there he was, standing a foot away, sweat still on his brow, his chest rising and falling from the performance. He didn't say, "Miss anything," just Rachel. God help me, I smiled. We stood there awkwardly for a moment before he pulled me into a hug. It was brief, but not brief enough. His hand pressed gently into the middle of my back, and it took everything in me not to lean into it. "You look exactly the same," he said. "You don't," I replied, and then immediately regretted how breathless my voice sounded. He asked if I wanted to grab a coffee. I should have said no, I knew that. But I didn't. I said yes. Like some younger, looser version of myself had taken over. We walked 2 blocks to a late-night cafe. It was nearly empty. The lights were low. He ordered black coffee. I ordered tea I wouldn't drink. We sat in a booth, and he talked about New York, about rejection, about the exhaustion of performing versions of yourself that you don't even recognize anymore. I told him about teaching, about raising a teenager, about very little, really. I mostly listened. And then he said something I still hear when I try to sleep at night. I used to write those essays hoping you'd notice me, not the grades. Me. I laughed nervously. You were a brilliant student, Nick. Of course I noticed. No, he said quietly, his eyes locked on mine. I mean really notice. The air shifted. I sat perfectly still. My hands clenched around the edge of the booth seat. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. When we finally left, the street felt colder. He walked me to my car. I fumbled with my keys like a teenager, heart pounding in my ears. I'm in town for 2 weeks, he said, if you want to talk again. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. His lips were warm. He lingered. And then he turned and walked away. I sat in my car for over an hour, staring at the steering wheel, completely still. I wasn't confused. I wasn't even ashamed. I was alive. For the first time in years. I wish I could tell you I stayed away. That I recognized the danger in his eyes, the longing in his voice, and made the mature decision to cut it off. I wish I could say I went back to my husband, kissed him like I meant it, curled up beside him, and chose safety over temptation. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something inside me had already cracked open, and what poured out wasn't something I could shove back in. For 3 days, I didn't hear from Nick, and every hour that passed felt louder. I checked my phone like a teenager. Every buzz, every email notification, every spam call gave me a little surge of hope, followed by shame. I told myself that I was being ridiculous, that he was younger, busier, freer. He had a world of women in his orbit. He wasn't thinking about me. Then, on the 4th evening, just as I was chopping vegetables in the kitchen with the news murmuring in the background and Tom muttering about something work-related, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Unknown. Rachel, he said, his voice quiet, almost cautious. I didn't want to text. That felt less honest. I stepped outside onto the deck and closed the sliding door behind me. We talked for 45 minutes. About everything and nothing. About books, coffee, memories from school that I barely remembered, but that he had apparently stored like relics. He said I had once told him that good writing feels like undressing. I didn't recall saying that, but it sounded like something I might have said once when I was braver, sharper, before I became someone who wore cardigans and apologized for her opinions. He asked if I was free Friday. I'd like to show you something, he said. It's part of a project I'm working on. It's not done. It's messy, but it's honest. I should have said no, I knew that. But I didn't hesitate. Friday came. I told Tom I had a departmental meeting. I drove across the city to the address Nick had given me, a loft above a former print shop in a now trendy part of Seattle. The building was old, the elevator creaked, and the second I stepped inside his space, I felt like I'd crossed into another life. His place was beautiful in that unfinished, artistic way. High ceilings, paintings leaned against the wall. A vintage record player hummed something slow and jazzy in the corner. He offered me wine without asking what I liked. I accepted. He read me a monologue he was working on. It was about a man haunted by a memory, a woman he never touched, but thought about every night. The way her mouth moved when she read aloud, the way she held a pen, the sound of her heels on tile. It was me. Every word of it, and we both knew it. I couldn't meet his eyes when he finished reading. I felt seen in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. I had never heard anyone describe me like that. I didn't think anyone noticed me that closely. Not Tom, not my colleagues, not even myself. When I looked up, he was watching me, not with expectation, but with an almost reverent stillness, as if waiting for me to exhale. "You wrote that about me," I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. I've been writing it since I was 17. I should have stood up, left, said thank you, and walked out. But instead, I stayed. He walked over slowly, almost like approaching a wild animal. He stopped just a foot away. You're not supposed to be here, he said, voice low. I know. You're married. I know. You were my teacher. I know. Then why are you here? I looked at him, really looked at him. And for once I told the truth. Because I don't know who I am anymore when I'm not here. He didn't smile. He didn't touch me. He just stood there, close enough that I could feel the warmth from his skin, and said, Then stay. And I did. We didn't kiss that night. He didn't even touch me. But something passed between us that was heavier than touch. I sat on his couch while he sat across from me, and we talked. About everything. About nothing. I told him things I hadn't said out loud in years. That I felt like a ghost in my own house. That I was tired of being reliable. That I missed who I was before I became so small. He listened, really listened. And when I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the door and said, I'm not going to make a move, but if you ever want me to, I'll wait until you ask. I didn't sleep that night, and the next day I found myself texting him. Not about anything urgent, just, thank you. He wrote back simply, for what? And I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, for remembering I still exist. The strange thing about crossing a line is that you rarely notice the exact moment it happens. You think you're still on the safe side, just peeking over. You tell yourself that feelings aren't actions, and coffee isn't intimacy, and words aren't skin. But looking back, I see now that I had already crossed it the first time I said yes to seeing him again. Everything after that was just gravity doing its job. I started seeing Nick more often, always under the pretense of harmlessness, always in that same dimly lit loft that began to feel like a different world. One where I wasn't Mrs. Blake, the dependable teacher and wife, but Rachel. Just Rachel. We didn't kiss, not for a long time, but the space between us kept shrinking. He'd sit closer, our knees would brush. He'd rest his hand near mine on the couch, and I'd feel the heat of his skin like a pulse under my ribs. And he listened to me. God, how he listened. No one had done that in years. He remembered every detail I gave him. He quoted me back to myself. He looked at me like he couldn't believe I existed. Tom didn't notice a thing. Or if he did, he didn't ask. That was the quiet tragedy of our marriage. We were both too polite to challenge each other anymore. We talked about groceries, our son's math grades, whether or not we should reseal the driveway. We didn't fight. We didn't touch. We just coexisted. It made it easy to hide things. I didn't even have to lie, just omit. The first time Nick touched me, really touched me, I remember every second. It was raining. I'd gone to his place after school, pretending it was a spontaneous visit, but of course it wasn't. Nothing was. He had tea ready and a blanket. I sat next to him on the couch, close. Our knees touched again. But this time, neither of us moved away. We were talking about books, because that was always the safe ground between us. I told him I missed reading for pleasure, that I spent all my time reading student essays and forgot what it felt like to get lost in a story. You're in a story now, he said. I laughed. Is that your actor's way of flirting? He turned toward me, his face so close I could feel his breath. No, that's me telling you the truth. I've been writing you into scenes since I was 17. In every play, every monologue, you're always there. The room was quiet, except for the rain tapping the windows. Then he reached up and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers grazed my cheek. He didn't rush, He didn't pull me, he just looked at me, waiting. And I kissed him. It wasn't impulsive, it wasn't even dramatic. It was slow, careful, like we were both stepping into a room we'd been staring at for years. And when our lips met, it wasn't lust, not at first. It was recognition. It was relief. He deepened the kiss gradually, gently. His hand cupped my jaw, and I felt myself lean into it like a woman starved. I didn't feel old. I didn't feel wrong. I felt awake. When we finally broke apart, I didn't speak. I couldn't. My mouth felt bruised and holy at the same time. He whispered, "You don't have to say anything." I nodded. I left an hour later. He didn't ask me to stay. I think he knew I couldn't handle that. Not yet. Driving home, I felt like my skin was too tight, like every inch of me had been stretched into someone else. I parked in the driveway, sat in the car, and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't recognize her. And somehow, I didn't want to. Inside, the house smelled like reheated lasagna. My husband was watching TV, half asleep. My son had left his backpack in the hallway. Everything looked normal, perfectly, painfully normal. Tom looked up at me and said, "Hey, everything okay?" I smiled. "Yeah, just tired." He nodded, already turning back to the screen. I walked to the bathroom, closed the door, and stared at myself under the harsh light. My lips were still swollen. I touched them. And I didn't feel guilty. Not yet. I felt seen. I started living two lives. In one, I was Rachel Blake, wife, mother, educator, responsible, predictable, smiling politely at faculty meetings, listening attentively to my son complain about algebra, nodding at Tom's monotone retellings of his day. I made dinner, I paid bills, I picked up dry cleaning, I functioned. In the other, I was someone I didn't yet have a name for. Someone who wore lipstick in the middle of the day, who took longer showers, who texted with a flutter in her stomach. Someone who paused before undressing at night because her skin felt charged with something she couldn't explain. I didn't see Nick every day. That would have been too obvious, too dangerous. But we messaged, late at night, early in the morning. Sometimes just a single word. A photo of his morning coffee. A quote from something I'd once said in class. Once, he sent me a photo of his hand holding a book of poetry I'd introduced him to. My name was underlined in the margin. The next time I saw him, I let him kiss me again, and then more. It wasn't a planned encounter. None of them were. He texted me one afternoon, "I have the place to myself tonight." That was all. 6 words. My body reacted before my mind did. I told Tom I was helping a friend grade papers. I told my son not to wait up. And then I drove across the city like I was being pulled by something magnetic, unavoidable. The second I stepped inside, I felt it. The tension. The heat. He didn't speak. He just pulled me into his arms, slowly, as if checking one last time if I'd run. I didn't. His mouth found mine, urgent now, no hesitation. My hands were in his hair, his were on my waist. We stumbled back toward the couch, knocking over a stack of books, laughing into each other's mouths. We didn't go to the bedroom. We didn't undress all at once. It was slow, careful, reverent. He touched me like he already knew my body, like he'd imagined this 1,000 times and still wanted to be surprised. Every inch of skin he uncovered, he looked at, not glanced, not grazed, looked, as if memorizing me. And I let him. All of me. There was a moment when we were lying tangled on the floor, his hand resting over my stomach, my fingers curled around his wrist, when I thought, this is what it's like to be chosen, not out of duty, not out of history, but because someone sees you and wants you. Now, as you are, no timeline, no weight of years. He kissed my collarbone and whispered, "You feel like poetry. I nearly cried. Afterward, I stood in front of his bathroom mirror, naked, flushed, hair wild, and I didn't look away. I didn't cover up. I stared at myself. This woman who had broken every rule she swore she never would. And I didn't feel ashamed. I felt undeniable. Driving home that night, I expected the guilt to creep in. I waited for it, like a hangover. But it didn't come. What came instead was a strange kind of sadness, because I knew this couldn't last, because he was 29 and I was not, because I had a husband who might not love me the way Nick did in that moment, but who still believed I was his. Tom was asleep when I got home. Again. He barely stirred as I slid into bed. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft buzz of our son's white noise machine through the wall. The house was so still, it felt fake. Like I'd stepped back into a life I no longer belonged to. The next morning I went to work, like nothing had happened. I handed out essays, answered emails, complimented a girl's senior project, sat through a curriculum meeting, nodded, smiled, pretended. And then, at lunch, I got a message. From Nick. It said, "You left your bracelet." Attached was a photo of it, resting on his pillow, delicate, gold, unmistakably mine. And beneath that, just 4 words. "Want to come get it?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding, throat dry. I didn't answer right away, but I knew I would, because I'd already decided. I told myself it would be the last time. That's how most women justify it, right? One more, one last, one final taste before you lock the door and throw away the key. Only I never really had a key to begin with. I was already unlocked, open, unraveling. I didn't respond to Nick's text right away. I stared at it for hours. His words, the photo of my bracelet on his pillow, the implication beneath it. It wasn't an invitation. It was a statement, a truth. I wanted to say no. I really did. But by then, I'd stopped living in truth. I was living in craving. And craving doesn't listen to reason. So I made up another lie. Told Tom I was going to help a colleague with a lesson plan. I even texted a teacher friend and asked if I could say her name in case he asked later. She didn't question it. Why would she? I was still me. Still Rachel. Still the good one. When I got to Nick's building, it was already dark. I climbed the creaky stairs, heart hammering against my ribs, fingers trembling as I knocked. He opened the door in a black t-shirt and sweatpants, barefoot, casual, like I was just dropping by for tea. But the look in his eyes wasn't casual. It was fire. "You came," he said. I stepped inside. "I shouldn't have," I whispered. "But you did." He took the bracelet from his pocket and held it up between us. "Trade?" he asked, voice low. "This for another night?" I swallowed. "I thought you were going to wait until I asked," he smiled. "You just did." He kissed me in the doorway, harder than before, hungrier. My back hit the wall. His hands were everywhere, waist, spine, shoulders. I could feel the restraint in him, the heat being held just barely beneath the surface, and something inside me screamed for more. Not just sex, not just touch, but the way he looked at me, like I was lightning, like I was dangerous. We made love in the middle of the living room floor. No music, no words, just us, breathing, colliding, becoming something we weren't supposed to be. Afterward, he held me for a long time, my head on his chest, his fingers tracing circles on my hip. I felt like I was floating, somewhere between shame and euphoria. "I don't want to share you," he said suddenly. I looked up. "What?" "I don't want to pretend I don't care, that you're just sneaking away to feel something and then leaving again. I want more." I sat up, pulling the blanket around me. My heart was racing again, but this time from fear. "Nick, I'm married. I have a family, a job, a reputation." "And none of that stops you from coming here," he said. so don't pretend it means as much as it used to. I wanted to argue, to remind him he was young, idealistic, naive, that he didn't understand what decades of marriage does to a person, how complicated it is, how layered. But I couldn't. Because he was right. I wasn't pretending with him. I was pretending everywhere else. I dressed in silence. He watched me, saying nothing. When I reached the door, he said, "Next time, don't lie about where you're going. Just come because you want to." I didn't respond. At home, the lights were off. Everyone asleep. I walked through the hallway, past the family photos, past the evidence of the life I was supposed to be living, and I felt like a stranger in my own house. The next day, I was distant, disconnected. My son noticed first. "You okay, Mom? You look weird." I smiled. "Just tired." At school, I couldn't focus. I gave the same lecture on The Great Gatsby I'd given 100 times, but my voice felt hollow. I watched my students' faces and wondered if any of them could tell I wasn't really there, that I was somewhere else entirely. Nick didn't text that day, or the next. By day 3, I was spiraling. I checked my phone compulsively. I replayed our last conversation over and over. Was he angry, hurt, done? And then a message. "I want to see you again, but only if you stop pretending you don't want more." I didn't answer for hours. I needed to think. I needed space. But that night, after Tom fell asleep and I lay alone in bed, I wrote back, "I'm not ready for more, but I'm not ready to stop either." His reply came immediately. "Then we'll stay right here, until you are." I started measuring time by him, not by clocks, not by dates or appointments or responsibilities, but by Nick, the days I saw him, the hours I didn't, the minutes between texts, the seconds after he touched me, and I remembered who I used to be. My whole life narrowed to the space between our meetings. I started doing things I never thought I'd do. Leaving school early with made-up excuses, ignoring texts from Tom, letting my son order takeout 3 nights in a row while I sat in the bathtub pretending I was somewhere else. Someone else. I even skipped a department meeting, something I'd never done in 17 years of teaching, just so I could spend an extra hour lying on Nick's chest, tracing the veins in his arms like they held secrets I wasn't allowed to speak out loud. But what scared me more than the lies was how little I cared about telling them. Every time I went to his loft, I felt my body vibrate with anticipation, like I was stepping into a dream I didn't want to wake from. He didn't ask questions anymore. He just pulled me in, undressed me slowly, whispered things into my neck that made my knees weak. Sometimes we didn't even talk. We just existed together. I'd lie on his couch, watching him write in silence. He'd run his fingers through my hair absent-mindedly, as if I belonged there, like I'd always belonged there. And I let myself believe it, that this secret world was real, that what we had was more than an escape. But reality, of course, doesn't wait patiently outside the door. One afternoon, I was sitting at my desk when my principal came in, smiling, professional, cheerful. "I was just reviewing some time-off slips. You've been away a lot this month, Rachel. Everything okay?" I froze. I smiled. I lied. "Just some family stuff. My husband's mother isn't doing well." He nodded. "Let us know if we can support you." Support. That word tasted bitter in my mouth. That night, at dinner, Tom asked me if I'd remembered to confirm our anniversary dinner reservation. Anniversary, of course, 4 days away. I stared at him across the table, his familiar face, the quiet way he chewed, the polite tone of his voice, and I felt like I was looking at someone else's life. "Yeah," I said, "I'll double-check tomorrow." I didn't. Instead, I spent the next 3 nights with Nick. Each time, it got harder to leave. Not because of guilt, but because of how normal it felt now. His place was becoming home. His touch, my comfort. His voice, my anchor. Then, on the morning of our anniversary, I woke up beside Nick, naked and warm and deeply wrong. He was still sleeping, arm draped across my waist. I watched his chest rise and fall. For a second, I thought about staying. About texting Tom that something came up. About missing dinner, the flowers, the fake laughter. But I didn't. I kissed Nick's shoulder, whispered that I had to go. He opened his eyes slowly. "Happy anniversary," he said. I blinked. "What?" He smiled, bittersweet. "You told me. You talk in your sleep, you know." I sat up, pulling the sheet around me. "I didn't mean—" "It's okay," he said. "I'm not jealous of a dinner. Just don't pretend it means something if it doesn't." That hurt more than it should have. I got dressed in silence. He didn't stop me. When I got home, Tom was in the kitchen, pouring wine. He kissed my cheek. I flinched. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just a headache." Dinner was quiet. We made small talk, clinked glasses, smiled for the waiter. When he handed me the little velvet box across the table, I hesitated. It was a bracelet. Simple, gold. Just like the one I'd left on Nick's pillow a week before. I put it on. I said thank you. I kissed him. And I felt nothing. That night, I lay awake while Tom snored beside me. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows of our life stretching across the walls. I checked my phone. One message. From Nick. "I want to be the one who gives you things now, not the man who gets your leftovers." I closed my eyes. And for the first time since this started, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I didn't mean for it to go on this long. That's what I kept telling myself. That this was temporary. That I would stop. That some invisible switch inside me would flip and I'd return to my old self. Dutiful, grounded, safe. That I would put an end to it before anyone got hurt. But weeks turned into months, and I couldn't find the off switch, because part of me didn't want to. Life began to feel like two mirrors facing each other. My real life, my secret life, reflecting endlessly into a tunnel I couldn't escape. And the longer I stayed in it, the more distorted I became. Nick noticed first. "You're tired," he said one night, tracing circles on my back as I lay with my head on his chest. "I'm fine." "No, you're not. You never sleep. You barely eat. You flinch every time your phone buzzes." He wasn't wrong. My body had started betraying me. I was jumpy, thin, forgetful. At school, I mixed up assignments, lost track of deadlines, snapped at a student for something trivial. Colleagues asked if I was okay. I smiled and said yes. Tom asked too. He brought me flowers, made me dinner, touched my back when he passed behind me in the kitchen. I'd freeze every time. His kindness made me nauseous. I didn't deserve it, and I resented it, because it made it harder to hate him, and hating him would have made this easier. Then came the night I forgot my son's band concert. It was written on the calendar, highlighted, underlined, but I didn't show up. Because I was with Nick. We were on the floor, half naked, tangled in the kind of intimacy that feels like drowning in sunlight, when I looked at the clock and felt my stomach drop. "Oh my God," I whispered. "What?" he asked, sitting up. "My son? His concert?" It started 20 minutes ago. I threw on my clothes, hands shaking. My bra was inside out. My hair was wet from the shower. I didn't care. I barely looked at Nick when I left. When I got home, the lights were off. Tom was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a glass of wine. Luke was upstairs. I dropped my keys. Tom didn't look up. "I covered for you," he said quietly. "Told him you had a migraine and were sleeping. He said it was okay, that he understood." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. "He's 13, Rachel," Tom said, finally looking at me. He shouldn't have to understand this. I stood there frozen. Then he said it. Who is he? I blinked. What? Tom set down his glass. Don't insult me. I'm not stupid. You've been gone for weeks. You lie. You disappear. You flinch when I touch you. I don't even know what your voice sounds like when it's not fake. My mouth went dry. He stared at me. Just tell me. Is there someone? I thought about lying. I even opened my mouth to try. But I was tired. So tired. Yes, I whispered. Tom stood. He didn't yell, didn't curse. He just looked at me like he didn't know me. Is it serious? I don't know. Do you love him? I looked at the floor. I don't know. He nodded. Then figure it out, but not while you're here. I slept on the couch that night. The next morning, he packed a bag and left with our son to stay at his sister's for a few days. He said I needed space to think. What he meant was, he couldn't look at me. Nick called. I didn't answer. He texted, "Are you okay?" I stared at the message for hours. I didn't reply. For the first time since this began, I was alone. Fully, completely alone. And the silence wasn't peaceful. It was terrifying. Because now I had to ask myself the question I'd been avoiding since that first kiss. Was this love? Or was it just escape? The first morning without them, the house felt like a museum. Everything was still. Too still. The coffee pot sat unused. The hallway echoed. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. I wandered from room to room like a ghost. I didn't eat, didn't shower. I just existed. I kept expecting my phone to ring. For Tom to call and say, "Come fix this." For Luke to text me something teenage and stupid. For Nick to break through my fog with one of his reckless messages. But the phone stayed silent. And I didn't reach out either. Because I didn't know who I was reaching for anymore. I sat in the living room that afternoon, wrapped in a blanket, replaying everything. Every decision. Every lie. Every moment I could have stopped and didn't. I kept thinking about that night in Nick's apartment, the first time, how I told myself it was harmless, a moment, an exception, and then another, and another, until it was a life. Nick had become the only place I felt awake, but now I wasn't so sure if it was him I needed, or who I became around him. That night, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. Not to admire, not to check for signs of age or shame, just to look. My face looked thinner, older. But my eyes, they were different. Not softer, not darker, just more tired. I poured a glass of wine and sat in the dark with the glass untouched, staring at the wall. And that's when I finally texted him. "Can we talk?" He didn't answer right away. My stomach twisted. My mind raced through scenarios. What if he was done? What if I'd pushed too far? What if I'd meant more to him than he meant to me? What if I hadn't? Then 5 minutes later, "Come over." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys and coat and left, barefoot in shoes I hadn't worn in months. When I walked in, he was already waiting near the door, arms crossed, jaw tense. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me. "I told him," I said quietly. Nick blinked. "Your husband?" I nodded. He stepped forward. "What happened?" "He left, took our son." He exhaled, sat down on the couch. "You okay?" "No," I admitted, "but I'm not sure I want to be." He patted the seat next to him. I sat. For a long time, we didn't talk. We just sat. Breathing, not touching. I couldn't stop shaking. "I thought you might disappear," he finally said. "I did, for a while, from everything." He reached over and took my hand. I didn't pull away. "You're not just something I wanted to steal, Rachel? I didn't fall in love with the thrill. I fell for you." I looked at him, eyes stinging. And who is that exactly? I whispered. The woman who cheats on her husband? Who lies to her kid? Who ruins her whole life for some affair? He squeezed my hand. She's the woman who needed someone to see her, really see her, and I did. I still do. I closed my eyes. I don't know how to go back, I said. Maybe you're not supposed to. His words hit me hard. Not because they were wrong, but because they might have been right. He leaned in, kissed my forehead, slow and soft, not possessive, not hungry, just present. You can stay here, he said. As long as you need, no pressure, no expectations. I don't want to be rescued. I'm not trying to rescue you, he said. I just want you to stop pretending you don't need anything. Tears finally came, quiet, reluctant, but real. He didn't wipe them away, just held my hand. That night, I slept beside him for the first time, not as a thrill, not as a secret, but as a woman with nothing left to lose. No lies, no performance, just me. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't dream of my old life. I dreamed of nothing at all. Nick's loft had become a shelter, but also a cage. In those first days after Tom left with our son, I told myself I was just regrouping, just breathing, just stepping away from the wreckage for a moment. But it didn't feel like a pause. It felt like surrender, and not the kind that sets you free. Nick was patient. At first, he didn't pressure me to make decisions. He cooked dinner. He brought me coffee in bed. He let me lie in silence for hours while I stared out the window like a woman who'd forgotten how to speak. And for a while, that was enough. But love, real love, doesn't sit still forever. One night, maybe 2 weeks after I moved in, he came into the living room where I was curled under a blanket, rereading the same page of a novel for the third time. We need to talk, he said, voice soft but firm. My stomach tightened. I'm not going to do this forever, Rachel. I looked up. Do what? Wait. Live in limbo. Watch you disappear inside yourself. I didn't ask you to wait. He winced. You didn't have to. You being here, this felt like a choice. But now it just feels like hiding. I put the book down. I'm trying to figure things out. Are you? He asked. Or are you just afraid of what comes next? I didn't answer. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees. You left your family. You blew up your life. For what? My eyes filled with heat. For you, I said. At least I thought it was for you. His face didn't soften. And now? I shook my head. I don't know. You were light in the middle of darkness. You made me feel alive again. And now you feel what? Trapped? Guilty? Bored? Don't do that. I'm not judging you. I'm just asking you to be honest. I stood, pacing. You want honesty? I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know if I'm someone worth loving. I destroyed the only stable thing I had because I was starving for something I couldn't even name. Nick was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I love you, Rachel. But I don't want to be your escape hatch. I want to be your choice. I sat down again, burying my face in my hands. I don't know how to be a person right now. He reached for my hand. Then be broken. Just don't lie to me about it. That night, we didn't touch. We lay side by side, not speaking, not kissing. Just breathing the same air like strangers who once shared a fire and were now watching the embers go cold. The next morning, I packed a small bag. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I needed to remember how to walk on my own. Nick didn't stop me. He just kissed my forehead and whispered, I'm not angry. Just don't lose yourself again. I checked into a small hotel near the water, nothing fancy, just quiet. I didn't tell Tom. I didn't tell anyone. I needed space that wasn't defined by marriage or infidelity. I needed a place that wasn't someone else's, and for 2 days, I did nothing. I watched the water. I sat in the lobby with tea I didn't drink. I cried in the shower. I made lists I never finished. On the 3rd day, I called Tom. He answered on the 2nd ring. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," I said before he could speak. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." He didn't respond at first. "I know," he said finally. "I know you're sorry. I wasn't trying to destroy you, or Luke. I know that too. I don't expect to come home. I don't even know if I want to, but I'm trying. I'm trying to understand what I've done." "I hope you do," he said. "For your sake, not mine." I thanked him. We hung up, and I cried again. Later that night, I got a message from Nick. "Where are you?" "Hotel," I replied. "Needed space." He replied, "I understand. I miss you. But take your time." That was the moment I realized. Real love isn't a fire. It's not the heat. It's the waiting, the stillness, the holding of breath in the silence. And I wasn't ready for either. I thought that leaving everything behind would give me clarity. That silence would give me answers. That sitting in that hotel room, away from Tom, from Nick, from my son, from my job, from every lie I'd built, would help me hear my own voice again. But silence isn't clarity. Silence is a mirror. And what I saw in it was not the woman I used to be, or even the woman I was becoming. It was the in-between, a hollow version of me that didn't quite belong anywhere. I stayed in that hotel for 4 more days after speaking with Tom. I walked a lot. I wrote. I watched strangers through the window and imagined what it would be like to trade places. Sometimes I wondered if they were watching me back, wondering the same. On the 5th day, I packed my things and went home. Not to the life I had, but to the shell of it. The house was still. My son's bedroom was untouched. My husband's shoes were gone from the hallway. The kitchen smelled like emptiness. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, clutching a sweater that still smelled like him, and I cried. Not because I wanted him back, not exactly, but because I wanted the me that used to want him back. The woman who believed in commitment, in "we'll figure it out," in the invisible glue of shared history. Nick texted that night, "Still here, whenever you're ready." I stared at it for a long time. My thumbs hovered over the screen, typed out, "I miss you," then deleted it. Then typed, "I'm not sure what I want," then deleted that too. Instead, I called him. "I need to talk," I said, "in person." When I arrived, he opened the door without a smile. His eyes were tired, his jaw clenched. We stood there in silence for a long moment before he stepped aside and let me in. The apartment looked the same. My things were still there. Books I'd left on the table, a scarf slung over a chair, my toothbrush in his bathroom. It hit me like a punch. I'd tried to build a second home, but it was never really mine. We sat on the couch. I spoke first. "I've been alone for the last week, really alone, and it hurt more than anything else I've ever done. But I needed it." Nick looked down at his hands. "I kept thinking about what you said, that you didn't want to be my escape. And I realized I didn't just use you to escape my marriage. I used you to escape myself." He didn't speak, so I continued. "You made me feel alive, Nick. You made me feel wanted, desired, important. And I clung to that because I'd forgotten how it felt. But I can't keep using your love to replace the love I stopped giving myself." His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "Do you love me?" I looked at him, at the man who had once been a boy in the back of my classroom, who now sat before me like a question I couldn't answer. "Yes," I said, "but not in a way that would be fair to either of us right now." He nodded slowly. "I love you too," he said. "But I'm not here to be a chapter. I want to be the story. Tears welled in my eyes. I don't know if I'll ever be able to give you that. I wish I did. He reached for my hand and I let him take it. Then we don't rush, he said. But if this is goodbye, I need to hear you say it. I didn't want to, but I owed him that much. Goodbye, Nick. He kissed my hand. Didn't say anything else. I left my key on the table, walked out without turning back. If I had, I wouldn't have left. That night, I went home and opened every window in the house. I needed the air, I needed the cold, I needed something real to touch my skin. I spent the next weeks trying to rebuild, not a marriage, not a relationship, but a self. I met with Tom twice, calmly, kindly. We discussed co-parenting, boundaries, therapy. There was no screaming, no accusations, just the quiet grief of two people who had once loved each other deeply and now stood on the ashes of what they built. Our son was distant at first, resentful, but not cruel. One night he asked me, "Are you sorry for what you did?" I thought about lying, about sparing him the complexity of adult failure, but I didn't. "Yes," I said, "I'm sorry, but I'm also trying to be better now." He didn't say anything, but he didn't walk away either. That felt like a beginning. Nick didn't reach out again, and I didn't either. Not because there wasn't love, but because sometimes love isn't enough to justify damage. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. It's been 6 months. I still teach. I moved to a small apartment closer to campus. I go to therapy, I write in the mornings, I volunteer on Saturdays. I take long walks. I speak to my son honestly. I speak to myself gently. And sometimes, when I'm folding laundry or drinking tea or staring at my ceiling at 3 a.m., I think about Nick, about what he gave me, about how he saw me, about how maybe he saved me, not by loving me, but by reminding me that I still existed. I used to think cheating made me a bad person. Now I think cheating was the loudest scream I didn't know I was making. A scream that said, "I'm disappearing and I don't know how to stop it." And now? Now I'm not disappeared. I'm visible to myself. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.